On today's menu, tea from gardens so divine, they are only fit for the emperor. Hey everyone, I'm Siggy, and I love all things pu'er. That's why I'm here today with another very special kind of pu'er. This is Mansong Sheng Pu'er from 2021. As I've alluded to in the intro, Mansong is a region where tribute tea used to come from that was only drank by the emperor and the people in his court. Seemed quite special, doesn't it? So today, that's what we're going to try. Before we get into the first steep, however, I want to tell you about two things. First off, as we can notice, this is loose tea, matcha. Now, what can we say about matcha? There are a few things we need to pay attention to when we brew it. The first thing is, compared to pressed pu'er tea, matcha doesn't need a longer first steep to loosen the compression. So whatever you're kind of usually comfortable with in terms of steeping is what you should go for when you're brewing matcha. Don't let it steep for longer. Nothing needs to loosen up here. It already is loose and ready to go. The other thing is, if you want to learn more about matcha, there are actually 2 videos on the nannuoshan YouTube channel that can help you with that. First off, there is Gabriele's video called What is Matcha, where he explains a lot about what's going on here. And the other one, for a kind of more practical view, is a video where Gabriele and Dimitri compare the exact same tea, only that one was pressed and the other was left as matcha, as loose tea. Okay. So, I've mentioned we have a tea from Mansong here. Mansong is in Mangla, in the Yunnan province of China, which is where all pu'er tea comes from. The cultivar is Dayezhong, and this one in particular was harvested in spring of 2021. The price for this tea is 45 euros for 50 grams, $45 for 50 grams on the US shop, and 41 euros for 50 grams on the European shop. The other thing I wanted to talk about, in addition to matcha, is before we taste this tea, let's examine what we can expect in terms of taste. There are 2 factors that I want to pay attention to here. One being where this tea comes from, its, if you want to call it, terroir, its regional characteristics. The other being its age. I mentioned this was harvested in 2021, so it's 2 years old now. What could that mean for the tea's taste? Now, I am not expecting a kind of aggressive, youthful taste from this. Since it already is 2 years old, it should have mellowed out a little bit. Depending on how it was stored, we could even see some honey notes beginning to form, which is kind of typical once a proper pu'er tea is a few years old. The other thing I'm expecting is taste based on origin. Now, I personally haven't had much tea from Mansong, so I don't know what it really tastes like, but I've done a bit of research and this is what I found. Mansong tea should have no bitterness or astringency. It should have a harmonious and full mouthfeel with a subtle fragrance. So we notice immediately fragrance shouldn't be the most dominant aspect when we try this tea. Mansong tea has a strong sweetness and a long-lasting aftertaste. It also produces a strong warming sensation in the body. finally, a particular aspect of this tea that I've come across in my research is a so-called refreshing breath of the mountain. So it mentions that after you swallow the tea and you breathe out, you get that kind of cool, refreshing feeling coming up from your throat. This is supposed to be a specialty of good Mansong tea, and I'm definitely curious if we're going to find it here today. So after this introduction, let's just go ahead and get started on the first steep. I'm very keen to find out what we're going to find in this particular tea and if it holds up to the reputation of Mansong. Right away, on the wet leaf, I notice a pleasant fragrance, but not one that is too strong. Compared to plenty of other teas I've had, this isn't really a tea that is intensely fragrant. But it still smells very pleasant, don't get me wrong. Okay, so I just poured it in. Here's the first cup. Let's try it. Not very green so far, which is nice. So yeah, on the first steep, right away, what I notice is that this is indeed not an extremely fresh tea anymore. This has existed for a couple of years. Nice. Second thing I notice, sweetness is there, and it does really have some honey-like notes to it. Very good. So we get sweetness. We do get a tea that is a little bit more mellow than something that is completely fresh. I do get sweetness coming up again. And there really is a kind of fresh feeling when I'm breathing. I have noticed this in a few other teas, but it definitely is present here, and it's quite pleasant. Okay. Let's see how much this tea changes on the second steep. It's still very hot. I can say that much so far. Okay. While this is cooling down a little, as always, if you like what I'm doing here and you enjoy these videos, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the nannuoshan YouTube channel, and leave a comment. We greatly appreciate it. I do read and try to reply to every comment I see. It's always fun to engage with you all, both in the comment section and, of course, on the nannuoshan Discord, which I also highly recommend. Especially let me know if you've had tea from Mansong before, and whether what you tasted at the time lines up with the expectations I've described before. I'd be very curious to hear about that. Okay. More honey, flavor, and fragrance on the second steep. Mouthfeel mostly staying the same. What especially stands out right now to me is that refreshing feeling. I think it's more present than it was on the first steep. And it's definitely a strong characteristic of this tea. Nice. I really like it when you drink a tea and the aftertaste and the feeling it gives you and all of that stays with you for quite a while afterwards. It's like a nice echo that lingers from the tea session you just had. Also now on the second steep, I do feel like my body is warming up quite a bit. So I think I can confirm the warming sensation that was described to me. I think by the end of this session, this tea is definitely going to make me sweat a fair bit. But so far, I really like it. Turns out that tribute tea to the Emperor is indeed quite nice. Okay. Now, one more question remains. How many steeps can I get out of this tea? Whew. This was a long session. Let me just decant this final steep for a bit. This tea still has plenty left to give, but I'm on steep 9 now, and I've had plenty of tea. As expected, this did indeed make me sweat quite a bit. This is a very warming tea. It's also a very delicious tea. And before we drink some of this final steep for now, I have one more thing I want to tell you a bit about. We briefly talked about the origin of this tea, Mansong Mangla in Yunnan province, but I'd like to go into that in a little bit more detail to really give you an idea of where this tea comes from. So let's start with the province. Yunnan, we've mentioned it before, it's famous for pu'er tea, obviously in this context, and it is in the south of China. Let's go into a bit more detail. Next up, we have Xishuangbanna, which is one of the southernmost parts of Yunnan province. Xishuangbanna can be divided in east and west by the Lansang River. The place we're looking at today, Mansong, is in the eastern part of Xishuangbanna. In particular, it is on Yibang Mountain, which is one of the famous tea mountains in Yunnan, in Xishuangbanna. And on Yibang Mountain, there is Mansong, a village west of the Yiwu region. It's not particularly large, but it certainly is famous. As I've pointed out, Mansong used to be tribute tea for the Chinese emperor, and as such, it enjoys a certain reputation. From a small place all the way in the south of Yunnan, in eastern Xishuangbanna on Yibang Mountain, it's Mansong. And now, it's been here in my cup for quite a while. This is the final steep, and I'm ready to enjoy it to the fullest extent. yeah, this was a really nice tea. It's definitely quite light now compared to how it was at the start, but it's still a fair bit away from tapping out. That honey fragrance was present essentially throughout the entire session. That refreshing breath of the mountain, as they call it, was also quite notable. Of course, it got a bit lighter as the tea as a whole got lighter, but overall, it presents a very nice impression. Very good mouthfeel on this tea as well, also throughout most of the session. This tea stayed quite consistent, and what I got consistently was very good. As such, if you're a fan of younger tea that isn't extremely fresh anymore, and this kind of honey fragrance and refreshing feeling sounds good to you, then by all means, I recommend you give this tea a proper try. I'm gonna finish this last cup now. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we're gonna see each other next time.